appreciation is mutual. I have a great appreciation for your pastor. One of the first men who made a commitment to go to Vermont to work. The first men to say that he would help us, your church would help us to accomplish that task. He did so faithfully, and we're grateful for you and for him. And for Carol also, the blessing they are to us. We're going to go to the book of 1 Peter as we go tonight, chapter 3. I was thinking of when we were singing Fanny Crosby's song there, I should know him, just the language of it. When my life's work is ended, across the swelling tide, through the gates of the city, he will lead me where no tears shall ever fall. I was thinking to myself, if you want to have hope, you need to have perspective. You know what, an artist will draw a picture, and good artists, not the Picassos and the work artists of the world, but good artists, that when they put a picture in place, they'll draw the river or the road, and it'll go to a very pinpoint out there on the horizon. And you know that that road is as wide at that pinpoint as it is at this point. But the artist is able to see that road is narrowing. Guess what they see? They not only know that the road is narrowing, but they know that the road goes beyond that pinpoint. That was what was crossing my mind today, that the Bible believer looks at that piece of art, life as a piece of art, and he knows that the road, though it is pinpointing, it doesn't stop at the pinpoint.
That's right. Amen.
And it's just as broad and wide beyond that pinpoint where I can see as it is right here where I can see.
Amen.
You catch that, don't you?
Yes.
And that's what keeps perspective in the midst of, Paul called it perilous times. We'll look at that and then we'll get back here. In fact, do that. Go back to Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 3, just as kind of an introductory to 1 Peter. But just a few pages back, be easy for you to find. And maybe put a marker. There's one other thought out of Timothy we'll catch. Note how he begins this chapter to this young preacher, 40-some years old. Paul's 70-some years old. He's traveled that road, and he's warning this young preacher that as you look out on the horizon, that you've got to keep a perspective. And if you don't keep it, you're going to lose hope. He said this know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. And then it goes on to describe things that we can see in our day just as evident as they could then. And the beauty of it is that when the Lord Jesus talked about his coming or the last days, he did it in such an ambiguous way that every generation thought, this is it. And when Jesus said to John, I come quickly, his next words were, even so, come.
Amen.
Right now, this is as good a time as any. This is the last day. And then the next year went by, and the next 100 years went by, and the next 1,000 years went by, and each Bible believer, just like you and I, would look at that perilous time and say, this is it. Thank God we can live with perspective. Note the descriptions: lover of their own self, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful. You'd think that he had written this just yesterday about the United States of America, unholy, without natural affliction, truth, on and on the list goes. It's pretty gruesome, isn't it? Put your little marker there, Timothy. We'll come right back to it in just a few moments. But the thought for tonight is this idea of endurance. Endurance with hope. What deprives, it's different than if I'm, the difference of a marathon runner who runs for distances. He does it on purpose, or she does it on purpose. He does it with a purpose. He's wanting to cross that finish line. If he crawls bloody knees he wants to get across that finish line. But he has a purpose for doing it. Unlike the person who crashes their plane in the woods and they're enduring because they just accidentally they found themselves in that situation. And the world finds themselves, if they don't have this perspective that the Bible believer does, they're just crashed into the world. It's a chaotic world. It's a terrible world. All bad things are happening. Everything's happening all around them, and they can't stop it, and they get mad at everybody. It's perilous. That's different than us. We're the marathon runners. Some of us have been running for a long time. We've got a few bruises and bumps to show for it. But there's hope for us. We're like Fanny Crosby. We're looking beyond that horizon. We're seeing where the road ends.
Amen.
I think some of the perilous things that describe our current situation. I mean, we're just dealing with the virus thing, and that comes up in almost every conversation. This isn't the first virus or pandemic that's ever happened to the world, you know. But the first time we've responded like this. But listen, people have had their responses in different times, and we have to keep our eyes on the Lord. I think of people who, because of this virus thing, there's several people in the nursing home who used to visit a man, and he was already kind of isolated. He already had kind of dug himself a hole mentally and all of that. And now, all he sees is a couple of people coming in and out, delivering food, and maybe a nurse once in a while. And I'm thinking, what a terrible place to be if you don't have hope. We might end up there. If we do, the difference will be our hope will be beyond that horizon. And every day we wake up, whether the day is going to be the same or not, whether the food is going to be the same or not, we'll be looking for the opportunity, the little nurse that comes in, or the doctor that comes in, and we'll say, how's your family? We'll ask him about it, and we'll give him a tracker, we'll do something, as long as we have breath in this body, because we have the perspective. And that makes endurance hopeful. You see, life is hopeful, or it's hopeless, depending on how you look at it. Hopeful or hopeless, you decide. Your perspective determines it. You know this, so we won't go to it, but Hebrews 12, you remember that text where it says, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Amen. It's preceded with the verse that says that he endured, Christ endured the cross, then despising the shame, for the joy that was before him. There was hope in the endurance. It wasn't that he enjoyed the cross. He endured the cross, but it was with the joy that was before him that drove him to the finish line. That's the same perspective that keeps us moving ahead with hope in our lives. Go back to Peter now. Hold on to Timothy just a minute. There's one other verse there, Timothy, that's pretty important for us to look at in a moment. Here in 1 Peter, notice back in chapter 2, this is just kind of introductory. Chapter 3 is where we'll draw our thoughts. But chapter 2, he talks about, this is thankworthy, verse 19. If a man for conscience toward God endure grief, those two words caught my attention. This whole chapter 2 is filled with things about obeying people that aren't very honorable. Even people we don't respect, we need to be respectful to. He talks about servants and masters. He talks about submitting yourself. He talks about in the next chapter, wives being in subjection to their husbands. He talks about, verse 7, husbands dwelling together with wives. Being respectful is essential, even to those people that we don't respect. We need to be respectful. And here in this case, we find that these instructions are difficult and oftentimes bring about grief and sorrow and maybe conflict and rejection. But if we're going to endure those things with hope, we have to have a right perspective. Now we go to chapter 3 and verse 8. Finally, it's almost like he's concluding all these instructions. Finally, be ye all of one mind. Let me preface this, because this is the hard instruction. What are we supposed to do? Be of one mind. Jesus said that. He prayed that in his prayer in John 17. He prayed that they would all be one. This is not uniformity. And Pastor mentioned the Amish upbringing. I can still remember so clearly. Even though Mom and Dad had come out of the Amish by the time I was the youngest of 11, they had come out of the Amish by the time I was born. They were 40 years old. A lot of the Amish hadn't come out of them. And I remember one day my dad came home and he saw that my mom had sewed up some flowery, pretty dresses for my sisters. They were 18, 19, 20 years old, my sisters, and they were pretty dresses with flowers on them. And my dad was upset and made some kind of Amish comment about these wild dresses, colored dresses. And my mom said to him, well, if you wanted to stay Amish, why didn't we stay Amish? And he never said a word again. Let's shut it up. So in the Amish mentality, being of one mind means uniformity. It's kind of what you have a picture of communism, everybody wearing the same kind of clothes and marching in it. This is not uniformity. I've got you marked in Timothy, but I also want you to get marked in Romans. Look, if you will, in Romans chapter 16. Romans 16. When we're talking about being of one mind, and by the way, that's what creates a church that's healthy. And that's what creates a home that's healthy. Is there's this single-mindedness. In fact, we're not going to accomplish it on a political scale because you got, this idea of uniting the nation. That's a wild pipe dream.
Yeah, right.
30 million people united from all kinds of wild backgrounds. It isn't going to happen because they're lost people.
Right.
But that shouldn't be the case in a church that's full of saved people.
Right.
That shouldn't be the case in a home that's full of saved people. There should be single-mindedness. And here in Romans chapter number 16, he says in verse 17, he says, I beseech you, brethren, mark them which cause divisions and offenses contrary to the doctrine which you have learned, and avoid them. We're not talking about single-mindedness or uniformity in the sense of dress and attire, how you cut your hair and all that kind of thing, like the Amish would do. We're talking about single-mindedness, biblical truth. And the focal point for our unity becomes this biblical truth that just drives us. And avoid those who are divisive in that regard. I go back to our text, and again, keep your marker there in Romans. We'll hit it once or twice more. What should I do to endure with hope? Single-mindedness this is the characteristics of single-mindedness. Look at the list in verse 8. Number 1, having compassion on another. I don't know, when I read what it says about Jesus when he looked out over Jerusalem and he said it says that he had compassion on them as though they were like sheep without a shepherd. I don't know how you look at the world that's all messed up. The brutality or the rioters or the whatever you look at. I don't know how you look at it, but I tell you what I think sometimes. I have this sense of it's in the list here, this sense of, I wonder how it feels for them to pillow their head at night after they've just stolen the TV out of the store and excused it by being. I wonder how it feels to have used your authority in such a brutal way and find, I wonder how it feels. I remember how it felt for me in those days before I came to the Lord. I remember how I pillowed my head and looked out the window and hoped that the Lord wouldn't come back when my heart was in the condition it was. How must it feel for them? Yeah. And so when I think of that, it's hard for me to get so mad. Jesus looked at him, didn't get mad at him. It says he had compassion upon him. Compassion is the idea, and again, I ask you to hold on to Romans. See that in chapter 12. Here's kind of the conveyance of this idea of compassion. It's rejoicing. See in verse number 15. It's rejoicing with them that rejoice. 12:15. It's weeping with them that weep. That's the idea of compassion. We're coming to 12 again, so hold that spot. But can I look at people around me and say to myself, it breaks my heart to see them hurting themselves. The next point of this idea, this one-mindedness or single-mindedness, not only compassion one to another, but also loving as brethren. That also is a component of single-mindedness. If I can have the idea that we're not disassociated human beings, we're in the same family. There was a biological family I came into when I was born 67 years ago. Psalm 139 says God even knew that family before it was all put together. But then there was a spiritual family into which I was born as a teenager. And that family becomes as real as my physical, biological family. And the instruction is that we're to forbear one another, putting up with one another. I know that maybe there's a sense of, if I just stay by myself, I don't have to worry about getting in conflicts or arguments with people. That's dangerous. Do you know what God said when He created all the stars and all the firmament and everything He said? It is
not good that man be
it's
alone.
good. He said not good that man be alone. That's the only time He said it's not good.
Right.
It's good that all the stars are there. It's good that all the things are there. It's good that all creation is there, but it's not good that man is alone. I've made some of the dumbest, boneheaded decisions in my life when I've isolated myself from other people.
Right. Bye.
Brotherliness. Look back in our list again. Compassion, brotherliness, be pitiful, full of pity. Paul describes it as tender-hearted. Don't let your heart become hard. Man, I don't care what you are politically. I don't care what you are academically, and I don't care what you are financially. Doesn't matter to me. Don't let yourself become covetous and bitter towards the opposite of what you are in those areas. Keep a tender heart, pitiful, full of pity. Be courteous. See that in the list, verse 8? Not just compassionate, not just brotherly, not just pity, full of pity, but be courteous. Please and thank you and excuse me, and all of those things are still appropriate for our day, but it goes beyond that. Courtesy, Paul talks about esteeming others better than ourselves. What does the world teach you? I'm number one. And God's word teaches us the opposite. Esteem others better than oneself. Some people have said you got to love yourself more. No, the truth is you love yourself too much.
Yeah.
You need to start loving other people more. That'll solve some problems. Courteous. And then look at the fifth thing in verse number 9 in this list of things. What should I do to endure with hope? Don't steal. See, I don't see that there. Let's look at it. Not rendering evil for evil or railing for railing. You know what? Go back to Romans chapter 12 for a moment. Look in verse 19 in Romans chapter 12. What does it say about rendering evil for evil? What does it say about getting even? What does it say about revenge in verse number 19 of chapter 12? Dearly beloved, avenge not yourself, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Who does revenge belong to? The Lord. And if you steal, if you take revenge, you're stealing from God.
Yes.
You're stealing from God just as much as if you stole the tithe. You're stealing when you take revenge on somebody that's done wrong to you. And you get even with them. Number one, you'll never get even because they'll get even with you. It'll never stop. But the biggest part of that equation is that you're taking that which doesn't belong to you. Let God get even. He can take care of this business. Go back to our text again, and you can leave Romans. I think we're done there. But just think of this. What should I do to endure with hope instead of being this miserable, old, cranky, no perspective on life kind of a person? I should be compassionate. I should be loving like a brother. I should be pitiful and courteous. And I should be careful not to steal. But look at the positive side of this. I should administer a blessing. You see that? Contra-wise. I'm not going to give revenge, but I'm not going to do anything either. No. Bless them. These are hard truths. These don't come naturally. Go to Proverbs. Look in Proverbs chapter number 25, 21. This is a test for you this week. Somebody in your building, somebody in your neighborhood, somebody on your road, somebody at your workplace, somebody in your family who does something, either intentionally or unintentionally, that is adverse to you. See if you can accomplish this task in your own strength. Proverbs 25:21. If thine enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat. Make him a sandwich, take it to him. If he be thirsty, give him water to drink. That's a tough task, isn't it? Can you accomplish that in and of yourself? Absolutely not. This idea of being one-minded is supernatural. It's impossible to do on your own. That brings us to the second part of this letter. And hold Proverbs, there's one other thought there, Proverbs, that I want to catch before we go too far. So if I know this is what I should do, verses 8 and 9, look in verse 10 through 14. This is why I should do it. If that task seems impossible, my enemy, give him something to drink and eat. My enemy, bless him. If that's what I'm supposed to do, then tell me why should I do it? Here's number one reason. Look at verse number 10. For he that will love life shall see good days. Let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips that speak no guile. Would you go back for just one moment again to Proverbs and look this time in 18:21? I'm going to read Peter's instructions one more time, and I want you to make the connection to Proverbs 18 and verse 21. It said, for he that will love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil. What does the Proverbs writer say? He says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. And they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. speak death because I'm going to eat death. I'm going to get fruit from that. The power of the tongue. Isn't that what Peter is saying? Refrain your tongue. Because what you speak is what you're going to get. If you're going to give out cursing, you're going to get cursing. You're going to give out blessing, you're going to get blessing. If you love life, you're going to get life. That's why the most hopeful people in all the world are Bible believers, because they look beyond the horizon.
Amen.
And the bad things that happen, the perilous things that are going on all around them, don't shake them. Yeah, it causes some grief, and yeah, there's some setbacks, but they never lose hope.
Amen.
Because they're speaking life.
Amen.
If you look on back at our text, and you can leave Proverbs now, I think I'm done with that. But look back at our text in verse 10. This is the reason why I should keep a single mind. Because it produces life. Verse 11 kind of adds to it. Eschew evil, that is, avoid it. Do good, seek peace, ensue peace, that is, with others. Here's the second reason. This is probably the most important reason, isn't it? Look at verse 12. Here's one of the reasons I needed to keep a single mind in that list of things that we just talked about. Because the Lord's watching it. The eyes of the Lord are over the righteous. Does He watch you? Sure He does. Not like this mean older dad, like some of us have experienced, but He watches as a kindly, loving Father. The Lord watches us. The eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and the ears are open to their prayers. Guess what He hears? Not just the audible prayer, not just the audible words, but sometimes the inaudible words, the thoughts that I have. And you think, God, let the words of my mouth be acceptable. And the meditation of my heart. The reason I need to keep this oneness, this single-mindedness with the brethren, is because God's watching. And if you're worried about your enemies getting away with anything, look at the latter part of verse 12. If He's watching you and if He's listening to you, guess what? He's also watching and listening to those that are against you. Let Him take care of it. You don't have to defend yourself. Guess what? Your friends don't believe it anyhow, what they've accused you of. And guess what? Your enemies want to believe it. So you're wasting your time defending yourself. Just let the Lord take care of you. His face is turned towards them that are against you. Who is able to harm you? Verse 13. If you be followed to that which is good, if you suffer for righteousness' sake, happy are you. There it is, perspective. I know our goal is not to be happy. Our goal is to be holy, but if you're holy, you'll be happy. The problem is that you got a whole world of lost people that are trying to be happy.
Right. Yeah.
But they don't want to be holy, and they're never going to be happy.
There you go.
It's never going to happen. You know, they just go through life looking for something else to make them happy, and they're never going to happen. We found the secret. Holiness makes us happy. Be not afraid of their terror. Neither be troubled. Neither be troubled. High land. High. People are troubled on the right or on the left or in the middle or any place else on the political scale. We don't have to be troubled. Don't live in that hole. My sister said to me a long time ago, she said, she's the oldest, she's 89, she's the one in Honduras, mission. And I was talking about how her kind of rough background because of the Amish upbringing. And she said one day to me, when I was regurgitating some of this stuff, she said, you know, Junior, she said, you can't live in the cellar. And I thought to myself, you know what? I don't want to live here anymore. So I kind of forgot about this stuff, you know. that stuff back there. You know? I can't live in the cellar. It's poisoning me. All right. So you got the what, don't you? Verse 89. That's tough stuff. Compassion, pity, and courtesy, and on and on. No revenge, blessing. You got the why because he's watching, because it produces life. And let me give you the last part. This is the best part, and that's the how. If I gave you the what and I gave you the why and said, now go out and do it. Man, you grit your teeth and, I want to do this thing if it kills me. And then it starts killing you. You're miserable. Here's the how. See it in verse number 15. Sanctify the Lord God in your hearts. God's not expecting you to grit your teeth and make this happen on your own. Here's how you do it. It's the same thing that the Ephesus church had to learn the hard way. Years after they had this wonderful revival when they came into existence, years after they got this letter, decades after they got the letter from Paul, then they got the letter from Jesus, and he said one thing that stuck out in our minds: you've left your first love. Yeah. And you know what? What I found in my life, it was 57 years now since I came to the Lord. You know what I found? It's really easy to take him off that top priority spot and put myself there, or my wife there, or my kids there, or my finances there, or my health there. It's really easy to do. And the minute I do that, I lose perspective. So all I got to do, it's easy in the sense that I know what to do. I just need to repent of it and ask the Lord, please be first place in my life again. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. So sanctify the Lord in your heart. That simply has the idea of putting him first. Let him be set apart from everything else. Don't make him equivalent to your job and to your faith. Jesus said it this way. He made the point more dramatically than I made it. He said in Luke 14, he said, unless you hate your mom and dad and kids, and brothers and sisters and everybody else around you, then you really don't love me. And that's pretty strong language. And it wasn't because he wanted you to go out and shoot him and kill him and do all that. He's just trying to tell you that the love you have for me, if you compare that love for me and your priority for me, it ought to look like hate. Don't be hateful, but put me first.
Amen.
I don't want to be next. It's not good for you when I'm next. Sanctify the Lord in our hearts. Number 2, here's how. Be ready always to give an answer. Do you know why you put these papers on? I was thinking when Brian said about these stickers that are going on these papers that go out. Everybody, you know why you put those stickers on while you mail them to 1,000, 2,000? Hundreds of preachers get those papers. I can't tell you how many times I've laid in bed just before I go to bed and I read through my bullet paper and a thought will come out and I click that, I tear it out, put it on my nightstand, I say, gotta put that somewhere in Institute notes for Monday. Hundreds of preachers get that paper.
Yep.
Do you know what it is? It's verse 15. Be ready to give an answer. Sometimes I don't have an answer to give. And so I dig in God's Word, or I read somebody who else has dug in God's Word, and there's an answer comes off the page. And now I'm not just kind of winging it. I've done that before. I've winged it and painted myself in a corner where I really feel some platitude. You know, we do that a lot of funerals, and we should. You know, we don't want to be unkind. You know, we don't want to. But sometimes less is better if we don't know this.
That's right.
Do you know what? I hate to do this. We got a minute to do it. Job. Look at Job 42. 42 verse 3. Having biblical answers. Be ready to give an answer. Having biblical answers. Not philosophical answers.
Right.
Not political answers. Not answers that, academic answers. But biblical answers. Do you know what we do sometimes? Look at what Job says in chapter 42, verse 3. He said, "Who is he that hired counsel without knowledge?" Here it is. After all he'd been through, 10 kids dead, a wife that told him to curse God and die, quote, friends who just made his life miserable. His health is gone. Doubts just flowed through his mind, and then God finally interacted with him. And guess what his conclusion was? "Therefore have I uttered that I understood not, things too wonderful for me, which I knew not." Guess what? There are times that God chooses not to give us an answer. Let's just wait till he does.
Amen.
We don't have to have all the answers. But there are plenty answers in the book that we can give. And you say, "But that's not going to convince them." That's all right. Maybe someday when they're pillowing their head, they'll remember that little Bible verse you gave them.
That's right.
That's going to convince them a lot more than you kind of grabbing them by the collar. Go back to our text from Peter. You can read Proverbs. I think that's all moving around with you. Just be ready with God's word. There's one last thing. The what is one-minded, single-mindedness, compassion, all those things. The why is because it produces life and God's watching. How? It's by putting God first and being ready with an answer. But look at the last how. These are all equivalently important or equally important. That's the right way to say it. Verse 16, have a good conscience. Have a good conscience. Whereas they speak evil of you as evildoers, they may be ashamed and falsely accuse you of good conversation in Christ. I mentioned that earlier about wouldn't you hate to be that one who pillows his head every night with that thing he just stole, or that thing he just did? Wouldn't you be don't you appreciate a clean conscience? Yeah. And don't you hate it when your conscience gets all muddied up? I hate it. And so that being the tool by which we can keep this perspective, this hope in the midst of endurance. You can't get through life without suffering. But you can get through life with hope in the midst of suffering. Endurance is perspective, and perspective on others, on who I am, on why I suffer. It's perspective on how to steel my heart and mind when I look into Jesus, the author and finisher. Let's pray. How grateful, Lord, I am. And in the midst of perilous times, you promised it. You said, or you told us that perilous time would come. In the midst of it, in all the peril, there's this great hope. And all the difficulty and grief, wonderful hope. And it's not just wishful thinking. It's solid assurance and confidence that you know what you're doing. I don't have to know everything you're doing. You know, and we trust you because of all you've done before. We trust in what you'll do in the future. In Jesus' name.